welcome to episode 76 of the Life in General podcast. My name is Nick.
I'm Ian.
And as always, you can email any questions or comments to contact at lifeingeneralpodcast.com. Check us out on Twitter at LIGpod. We are on Facebook, Podbean, iTunes, Google Play. I'm sorry, it's not Google Play anymore. Google Podcasts. By the way, have you used their the Google Podcast app?
No, I haven't.
No? Have you?
I didn't even know they had one, to be honest with you.
Yeah, you did, because we have had this conversation before, I think.
I don't remember it.
No?
No.
Huh. Oh,
wow, that was compelling talk.
We're on Stitcher, Podcast Addict, Spotify, just about everywhere else. If you like the show, go on iTunes and leave us a 5-star review.
If you don't like it, go on iTunes and leave a 5-star review.
Yeah. If you don't like it, send Ian hate mail.
Please do. I love hate mail.
Do you?
Yeah, I do.
It's kind of fun sometimes. Sometimes it's, I don't know.
Hey, hate mail is easier to deal with than like someone yelling at you in person. At least you can stop and think about it and go, you know what? Maybe they're right. Maybe I am a fucking asshole.
People generally don't yell at me in person, though. But
I do from time to time.
Yell at me in person?
I have yelled at you in person, absolutely.
I don't think you've ever yelled at me.
I have. We've had some pretty heated arguments.
Yeah, but that's not really yelling, though. I don't know.
I've called you an asshole before. No, without any problem.
Yeah, but you gotta say something that's not true. I am an asshole.
Right. I'm like, what difference would it make if it's true or not? If I'm yelling it at you,
jeez,
you are. You're an asshole. But
I'm not an asshole.
You have a lot of asshole moments. You have more than a lot of people do.
Really?
You have more than me.
Sometimes I just like being confrontational.
That's true. So that makes you an asshole.
Sometimes it's just fun to be confrontational.
I do the same thing, but that makes me an asshole.
Oh.
I just don't do it as often as you do.
No, because everyone thinks you're nice, Ian. Everyone we work with, they're always like, Ian's so nice. Ian's so nice. And I'm like, sometimes.
I'm nice to them.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yes. Because I believe in a positive working environment.
Well, so do I. I'm just not always nice to everyone.
I try to be nice to everybody.
I'm nice to people, but I give people too much shit, I think.
Yeah, and you're not. I think they say that just because you're, like you said, you give people shit. Yeah, so it comes on. It doesn't come on. They're not saying you're actually mean. You're just, I don't do that. I'm polite and courteous.
We also work with some snowflakes that
a few of them
can't take
I would say, I just, like I said, I like a positive work environment. I give what I expect back, and that's all I can say.
Yeah.
Treat people the way you want to be treated.
Sure, why not?
Yeah, I mean, in the
grand novel idea.
It is. It works for me. That's why everyone says I'm nice.
Whatever. They're gonna write on my tombstone that I was an ass.
Yeah.
Speaking of assholes, so we're going to talk a little bit about the Civil War.
Yeah. The asshole part of that would be the South. But
yeah.
Anyway, just for the record.
Yeah. So we kind of talked before, briefly, about issues surrounding the Civil War and things like that.
And the aftermath.
Yeah. And I've posed the question before whether or not, maybe Lincoln made the wrong choice and maybe should have
just let him go.
Let him go.
Yeah.
So we've talked about that before, but it's just, I saw this article, I think it was in the New Yorker, talking about whether or not the South really kind of won the Civil War after all. And it was really kind of interesting. And I don't remember, I'm a terrible host. I didn't write the guy's name down or nothing. I just remember, I think it was in the New Yorker. I'm sure you can probably Google it.
I'm going to try and Google it while you're talking.
And it was kind of, and it really kind of brought up some really interesting questions. One is, was the Civil War really inevitable?
Yes, I think so. And to go back to the last question, I think the South overall did win the war.
Well, I think they lost the battle, but over the course of 150 years, won the war overall.
In the grand scheme, yeah. That's what I'm saying. They lost the fight, but they won the
hearts and minds.
I guess you could say that.
That's kind of the way I look at it. Obviously, had the Union let the Confederacy leave, obviously it would have been bad for the slaves.
That's the only thing that the North got out of it.
But look at it this way: do you think the slaves would have eventually won their freedom organically?
It would have taken a lot longer, and it probably would have come to a revolution.
Yeah.
On their part, which could have been a lot bloodier for everybody involved. Not to say that the Civil War wasn't bloody, because it
was. Yeah.
I don't know. I can't. There's a lot of articles they've done on the Civil War, apparently.
Oh, really?
Yeah. With the benefit of hindsight that we have, abolishing slavery as an amendment is the absolute best thing that came out of the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they hadn't done that, the South would have maintained slavery probably for at least another 50 to 100 years.
I don't know if it would have lasted that long.
I think
once the Industrial Revolution hit.
This is why I think it would have taken another 50 to 100 years. Because look at what happened in the aftermath of the Civil War. Once the North and the South stopped fighting, the South was in disrepair for a short time. Mm-hmm. There was Reconstruction.
Yeah.
And then the Republican Party at the time, the Party of Lincoln, gave all of their power, all of their government power to the South and basically did away with any real progress.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was getting at the Civil War ended what, 154 years ago?
55. Because it was 1864. Oh, no, it was 1865. You're right.
I think it was 1860, yeah.
Yeah, 1865, yeah.
So the 154 years ago, the Union forces triumph, and beat the Confederacy. They give up all this other stuff. And then you've got 150 years of Southern Confederacy sympathizers that have slowly throughout time made themselves part of society, and really through creating laws, legislation, legal precedent, social groups have kind of brought a lot of that mentality, a lot of the principles of the Confederacy, and kind of ingrained it in American culture.
Right. And that's kind of what my point really is, that the abolishment of slavery through the 13th Amendment was the goal and the best thing that the North got out of it. But it didn't really free anybody. It just abolished the idea of slavery.
Yeah.
But once the war was over, the South got Jim Crow laws and segregation.
Yes.
And essentially it's the same thing. Instead of now
it actually took a little bit of time. Once
it did.
Once the Civil War ended, the next election cycle, you got it was Mississippi? I think it was Mississippi or Missouri, one of those states, because they were both slave states, but one of those two states elected the first black congressman.
Yeah, because former Confederates by law weren't allowed to hold any office anymore.
Correct.
But that all changed with, was it Buchanan? The Buchanan election? The Democrats won that election, the presidency, but by such a small margin that they negotiated getting the Republican presidency, in return giving the Southern Democrats power back, saying, "Okay."
It was the 14th Amendment that barred them legally from holding office.
Right, but that all changed with that election.
It was one of them, yeah.
One of those. And once that happened, then there was no way any former slave could hold any office, because
no. So what you had was you had the first elected black official, and then it almost instantly created a backlash of all this fear through the white community in the South and in the Confederate states or former Confederate states. And I think that's when you really saw a push to pass these laws to be segregated, to keep African Americans in poverty, in ignorance.
Right. Yeah, I mean, like I said, the Jim Crow laws and segregation, all that stuff that lasted a whole nother 100 years. That's why I said slavery probably would have gone another 50 to 100 years, because it did.
Well,
in a
yeah.
sense.
I mean, in the 60s and 70s, blacks are still fighting for equality.
Right.
And that was 100 years after the Civil War.
Exactly. That's my point. And I mean, you could argue that they're still fighting now.
Well,
not as much, though. The battles have dwindled to the extent that now it's just a matter of.
Well, it took them 100 years to get the right to vote.
Right. And that's all what I'm saying. It's like, you could argue that the South did win the war, because even though they didn't have the slaves anymore, the result for what now is former slaves was essentially the same thing.
So you saw
gentrification instead of slavery.
Yeah, you saw kind of a similar push with the Ku Klux Klan in the late. So the Klan in the late 80s, early 90s really started making a push to...
You're talking about the 20th century? Or
yes.
Okay.
Yes. Started making a push to become just regular people in society. And...
Well, infiltrating.
Yes.
Into...
taking off the hoods and becoming part of society, becoming...
normalizing themselves.
Yeah. And through normalizing themselves, they were able to normalize their thoughts. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of that push, a lot of the Klan push through the 80s, 90s, I think has gotten us politically where we're at now.
To a degree, because there was that one former neo-Nazi who said that it was either him or someone high up was trying to do the same thing with the neo-Nazis. Stop tattooing the swastikas on you.
Yeah.
Stop getting the tattoos. Start wearing suits and ties, because it's going to normalize you. You start getting into positions of power,
and then you can do real change.
And then you can do real. Well, is that real change, or is that regression? Change for them.
Change for them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but change doesn't have to be a good thing.
Well, yeah. That kind of change is not.
So the Confederates, the former, and even though with the 14th Amendment, the Confederate officers weren't allowed to hold office, but they had a lot of sympathizers. Right. They had a lot of former Confederate soldiers that were able to get themselves in a political positions, and not on a national level. A lot of this stuff started on a local level.
Right. Well, that's really what it was. That election I was talking about, it was. At that point, the agreement was, like I said, I think it was Buchanan. Buchanan wins. We'll take the Union troops out of the South, because the Union troops were still in the South enforcing all these protections. And okay, we're going to take we're no longer going to be watchdogs over you. And that's when it really got bad, because then the sympathizers could get into power.
Well, the sympathizers were already in power at that point.
They were trying, but you were getting former slaves, educated slaves who were starting to run for office, getting elected. But that went away once the Union soldiers were pulled out.
It couldn't have been Buchanan. He was the president before Lincoln.
Okay.
So you had Lincoln, then you had Andrew Johnson,
Garfield,
and then you had Grant, Hayes, and then Garfield in 1881.
Garfield was the one I'm thinking.
Okay.
Because he barely won. He didn't even really win the election. It was kind of a compromise that allowed him to be president, but the South to basically get all those troops out of there and no longer have that watchdog mentality over and make sure that they were, not enslaving anybody anymore. But obviously they couldn't to that degree. But it allowed them to do Jim Crow and everything else.
I don't think it was Garfield either.
Are you sure? I'm pretty sure it was Garfield.
So Garfield was only in office from March to September of 1881.
Yeah, he died, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And then it was Chester A. Arthur.
It wasn't him. It was. I'm sure it was Garfield.
You sure it wasn't Rutherford B. Hayes?
No. Maybe it was Hayes.
Because I know it wasn't. I don't think it was Johnson.
No, it wasn't Johnson. He took over for Lincoln when.
Yeah, and killed millions and millions of Native Americans.
Yeah.
I know it wasn't Grant. It had to have been Rutherford B. Hayes.
Yeah, I think you're right now that you mention it.
So he was president from 1877 to 1881.
Whatever, it's based on his election, and the compromise came as a result of that election.
Okay.
So I'd have to look it up. My phone's not getting a signal, and I don't feel like clicking on the Wi-Fi right now. But as a result of one of those early elections post-Civil War, the South, the compromise was you pull the Union troops out and let us do our thing, essentially. Not to the extent that they were like a separate entity anymore, but states' rights, state sovereignty went back to them where it wasn't there before.
And that's kind of another thing that I think you can look at and say, okay, the Confederate legacy has had an impact is through revisionist history.
Right.
Because as I know you didn't live in the South for as long as I did, but I talked to a lot of people that would tell you, that would say all the time, well, the Civil War wasn't fought over slavery. It was fought over states' rights, or it was fought over economics.
Right. States' rights to have slaves and the economic benefit of having slaves.
Yes,
it was about fucking slavery.
That's exactly what it was.
I probably would have gotten beaten up in the South if I'd stayed much longer.
And they said, and I had several conversations with people that said, one person in particular that I worked with down there that said, well, yeah, slavery was part of it. It was a small part, but it was a part. There was lots of other things that. No. The Civil War was about one thing: owning black people.
Yes. And the fact that it was wrong.
Yes.
And should be wrong. Yeah. You see that in a lot of things, revisionist history. To the extent that you even see people who will revise the history of World War II and, Holocaust deniers.
Yeah.
But again, essentially, they're the same people.
Probably.
People who revise the Civil War and the purpose of that war, they're probably the same people who say that the Holocaust didn't happen.
After that first election, after the Civil War, when you started having blacks elected to office, you saw that there was Confederate sympathizers saw the empowerment of African Americans, and it really deepened their anger and racism. And I think at that point is when the concerted effort was made to look, we need to do something about this. We need to get in here. We need to make change, and we need to do it quickly.
Right.
And they did. I mean, the Klan was created around that same time.
Right. Yeah. During Reconstruction.
And the basis of the Klan, they were a community organization, basically, if you want to say so. And they
were also a religious organization.
True, but their main primary focus was to terrorize and murder blacks and terrorize
the ones that were trying to have power,
yes,
have status. Yeah,
exactly. And at one point, there was millions and millions of Klan members in the United States. Their total listed numbers have drastically dwindled, but there's still pockets of huge
absolutely.
support in this country for the Klan, which is almost fucking mind-boggling in 2019.
Is it really though? We're having the abortion argument again now, 46 years after it was already decided. Speaking
of that, I haven't even heard a whole lot about it lately.
Well, just because all the
tied
states
up in the courts right now.
Well, we'll see what happens. But our country has gotten to a point where we can no longer move forward. All we can do is move backward, at least on social issues.
Yeah.
And I don't understand that. But in my opinion, that's a whole nother element of the South won the fucking war.
Well, they lost the war for their own separate nation, but they won
on all the other ideals of what they separated for.
But because there was, through Jim Crow laws and all these other things, they were able to create laws that on the surface seemed unremarkable, but they drastically impacted and disadvantaged blacks.
Yes.
Through racial herding and putting them in specific areas. You can live in our town, but you have to live over here.
Right.
Where we're not going to provide any
social services.
Any services to. Right. There's going to be no money, even through redlining neighborhoods, which was legal. Redlining was legal in the United States until the late 70s. Mm-hmm. And if you're listening to this and you don't know what redlining is, just look it up.
Right.
It was basically a way for them to keep money out of minority neighborhoods. Yeah. A legal way to do it. So that's things. That's an example of something that on the surface you can say, oh, well, you can look at their justification and it makes sense, not understanding the underlying issue that it creates.
Right.
Not being a person of color.
Well, that's the argument for segregation. We're never going to get along, so we'll just have separate but equal. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I guess to some degree, if you think about it, that on a basic human level, I guess that makes sense. Yeah.
Which I was going to bring up Plessy versus Ferguson.
Right. You we're not going to get along, so you have your side, we have our side. Mm-hmm. That's fine. Whatever. But the fact is that it's never that way.
Yeah.
It's always going to be unbalanced, and history has proven that to be true, especially in a situation when you do separate based on what's considered race. Mm-hmm. That's always going to make a difference.
But you mentioned Plessy. Plessy.
Well, you mentioned Plessy. I didn't.
Well, you said separate but equal.
Separate but equal.
That's what.
I didn't mention the court. It's the court case.
Plessy v. Ferguson. That was 1896. Mm-hmm. So that was 31 years post Civil War.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The decision that came out of that case not only cemented the discrimination that came before it, but it really created legal justification for all of it moving forward.
Right.
And it's that argument, 120 years later, 120, almost 125 years later, mm-hmm. is still being argued.
I know.
Today.
That's what I mean. We as a nation, we can't seem to let go of our past, mm-hmm. ever. We're always constantly going back to it. We're always constantly, and we can't go back to the good stuff because there is some good stuff there. We always go back to the bad stuff. We always revert back to bad. Yeah, everything.
And it was the 1890s when Southern states led by former Confederate sympathizers put in place things like poll taxes, mm-hmm. which on the surface made sense at the time. Not understanding the disenfranchised and hurt black voters. It was the 1890s that they really took the black vote away mm-hmm. and restored it to basically white men.
Right. White landowners, essentially, but
white men in general. Right. So that was kind of the first kind of reclaiming of pre-Civil War white rights. Mm-hmm. And they kind of built off of that. Once they started seeing that they were able to be successful with a lot of these smaller, like I said earlier, what seemed like insignificant laws, it really kind of pushed their efforts even further
to move forward, right? And like
I said, with Plessy in the late 1890s, really put it all on steroids.
Well, right, yeah. Once everything went separate but equal, it was obvious that it
was legalized. I mean, it wasn't slavery, but it was legalized discrimination,
right? Because and the main reason is because what was now the white stuff opposed to what was colored stuff, because mm-hmm. colored at the time, black, was already established. So basically, it's like saying, okay, we're going to go separate but equal, but everything that's already exists is ours, and you have to make up your own shit. Yeah. And you have nothing to start with. Mm-hmm. That was the first indication of. I think about them like, well, these were primitive thinkers, at least theoretically by our standards. Yeah. But we do the same shit today. Maybe not
to the same level.
Not to that same level, but our answers for things, our ideas in terms of legislation, and I mean it's the same thing that the anti-abortion people are doing now. Little things, little laws, making it so you can't have you can't do abortions at your clinic unless you're this close to a hospital and have this much connection to that hospital. So now, okay, we've shut down 20 abortion clinics now, making it so that you can't have an abortion past a certain point. Which there is a point that it is wrong, but they're trying to make it very early. Little things, just little things. We're still doing it, and no one. I'm assuming they fucking know what they're doing.
Of course they do,
and we can't seem to stop it.
Yeah,
I don't understand that. That's why I don't understand this whole idea of when I said it was primitive thinking, but it's not, because we're still fucking doing it. I kind of went off on a little vent there.
No, you're right though. I mean, it just, it's like, I don't know if you just mentioned it or not, but it was one of the things they're doing with abortion, what they've tried to do with abortion before. And I don't really want to bring abortion into this, but
right? But there's a certain connection to it.
There is. Yeah. What they say, well, first they were like, well, you can have an abortion clinic in in your town. Oh, but it has to be connected to a hospital.
Yeah. But the only hospitals in the town are Catholic.
Exactly. Yeah. So and then people would say, "Oh, well, that makes sense," not understanding that, that basically will shut down a majority of the abortion clinics in your
right, because the only hospitals that are within a certain range, because they have to be within a certain geographical location for medical reasons, which doesn't make any sense. And it does on the surface.
Well, yeah, because there are instances in abortions where medical emergencies happen.
Right. But that's true of any medical thing.
Exactly.
They don't put that same restriction on dentists, and it's probably more likely for dentists to have issues overall because far more people are having dental procedures.
Yeah. I mean, you can. I don't know. I don't want to get too far off.
No,
on it.
But it's connected only in the sense that it's the same playbook.
Yeah.
Over and over again.
So after in the early 20th century, I don't remember the name of it, but I've seen it before. I've seen the actual cartoons. There was a really popular cartoon in the early 1900s.
When we say cartoon, we mean comic strip.
True.
Because I mean, just when you say cartoons now, there's
okay, comic strips, but it always showed blacks as raping going after the white women, chasing after them, things like that, and it really provoked fear in the white community. Just by its depiction. There was a Harvard professor, Louis Agassiz, I think is how you say his last name. It was Agassiz, but he used his pseudoscience. It was science at the time to depict African Americans as an inferior species. Oh, look at the thickness of their skulls and things like that. They've got smaller brains, and it really all kind of blended in to kind of push even people that would have been from, because a lot of the family members that had fought in the Civil War were dead, but it was families of Union soldiers that would even look at things like this, like these cartoons, like pseudoscience, and buy into this narrative of blacks being different, being an inferior species, being predators, things like that really helped divide the country, which is what the Confederate sympathizers wanted.
Right.
And it was just layer upon layer. They just kept adding more and more to it. Movies. Look at early movies. The blacks were always depicted as what? Clowns, minstrels,
or servants.
That's all they were. Yeah. And a lot of times they weren't even black actors. They were blackface. Right.
Well, very early. Once you got into like the 30s and 40s, you'd have black actors, but again, they're
doing the same thing.
They're performing. They're music band. They're bands in the background, or dancers, or servants.
Yeah.
As you said.
So I mean, it's really unfortunate But at this point, what do you kind of do about it all?
What you mean at this point in 2019?
Yeah.
Well, I just think it's sad that we actually have to do anything about it in 2019, but
because and I don't want to be too political, but you President Trump openly courted racists.
Oh yeah,
in 2016.
Absolutely. But he normalized them more than they were normalizing themselves.
He wasn't the first one to do it though. So look at Ronald Reagan or Saint Reagan.
Yeah.
So when Reagan won the Republican nomination, do you know where his very first rally was after he won the nomination? Philadelphia, Mississippi. His very first rally. Do you know what Philadelphia, Mississippi is famous for? The only fucking thing it's famous for?
I would imagine something racist.
Freedom riders being murdered in the 1960s.
Oh,
It's the only thing that Philadelphia, Mississippi has ever fucking produced. So why would Reagan go there? Well, it looked normal to everyone else.
Right.
Oh, he's just going to a southern state. It's whatever.
Because you could even argue that as a Californian, he had to court the South more than, say...
Well, because he was running against a Southerner.
Right.
In Jimmy Carter.
So that was his first stop on the campaign.
Yes.
We made it sound like it was his first presidential
stop. No. After winning the
nomination. Okay.
The Republican...
That's where I got
the first stop after winning the Republican nomination,
Yeah.
Philadelphia, Mississippi.
Right.
Yeah. That's the definition of dog whistle politics right there. Yeah. So Trump, for everything at least Trump is a little bit more blatant about it.
He's blatant about everything he does. That's the sad thing. That's how he's normalizing so much of this negativity and badness, is by being more open about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I see what you mean. I did not know that. I've never liked Reagan anyway. I've always thought he was a fucking garbage human being, but...
Well, I wouldn't say garbage human being. He was a garbage president, and he did a lot of garbage things, and spearheaded a lot of really garbage policies.
What does that tell you about his character, though?
I don't know. I didn't know the guy.
Good people can do bad things, but bad people are usually the people who do bad things over and over again for their own benefit.
He wasn't Dick Cheney.
Well, I wouldn't call Dick Cheney a garbage human being. I call him like an evil human being.
Satan on earth.
I would think
if there was like a human form of Satan, it probably would be Dick Cheney.
It could be. It's difficult to say that and not, think about people like Hitler or
because along the same lines, yeah.
Yeah, I try not to use those dogmatic ideas.
Dick Cheney helped murder a whole lot of people also.
Yes.
Obviously not as many as Hitler, but...
Well, you could argue.
You look at the millions of people that have been affected in Iraq.
Right. No, believe me, I'm not trying to...
defend Dick Cheney?
Defend Dick Cheney in any sense of the way, but... Dick Cheney is a different level of evil than Ronald Reagan. Yeah. Ronald Reagan is just a garbage human being.
I gotcha. Okay.
Okay, so because you also can argue that Reagan knew what he was doing, but a lot of times didn't know what he was doing.
It's Saint Reagan.
I'm not going to call him that. I'm sorry. I'm not.
I'm just saying that because that's how people.
That's how people. Yeah, revisionist history. But you could argue that as far as Republicans go, he is a saint because a lot of their power now is as a result of things of things he put into place.
I think it's really kind of funny. Generally, they always say the victors write history.
Yeah.
Write the history.
But it's funny because in a lot of cases it's not. Generally speaking, if you're talking about old school war, because back in hundreds and hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, wars, there weren't peace treaties. There was conquering. You didn't just fight until the leaders agreed on something. Yeah. The war was over when one side surrendered completely and assimilated, or were wiped out. In many cases, just wiped out.
Which is what was supposed to happen after the Civil War.
Yeah,
and then Lincoln was murdered, and that all disappeared.
Yeah. Well, because he would have been far more forceful about implementing real change in the South.
Yeah.
Because that's what he wanted.
Yeah. And as soon as Johnson took over, that all disappeared.
Right.
Oh, that effort disappeared.
That's the downfall to having someone like Lincoln whose ideals and principles were so high that there was no one around him who was on his level.
Yeah.
No way. There just wasn't. Unfortunately. So, yeah, killing him did kill the dream, essentially.
Well, for former slaves, it did.
Well, the dream for America. I think slavery will always be the one thing that unfortunately defines us as a nation.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't like being defined that way, but unfortunately, that's the case. Everything that this nation is either as a result of slavery, the result of getting rid of slavery, or the result like I said, a result of.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
Because slaves built a lot of this country.
Yeah. The
ending of slavery was kind of it defined our nation as it's potentially having a conscience. Mm-hmm. But then the back end of how slavery ended and what happened defines us again in another bad light. This nation is it kind of goes back to that, what was that that preacher, that former Obama preacher who he's a goddamn America. I can't remember his name.
Right? Wasn't
Reverend Wright, yeah.
Right.
He's not wrong. Our history is literally bathed in blood.
It is.
And there is, I don't...
But then again, I think every country is built the same way.
Maybe, but I'm not a member of every other country.
I know.
I can only judge mine. Mm-hmm. And, it's just unfortunate that's what defines us. Yeah. And it should, because we should have to take responsibility for that. Yeah. But we still haven't yet, I don't think, as a nation.
And I think that's kind of one of the reasons why there is such backlash against phrases like "Make America Great Again," because I'd argue all of American history, there's been large sections of our population that it wasn't good for.
I would argue that it's probably very likely our nation has never been great.
Not to everyone.
Not to the vast majority.
Exactly. It's always been great
for the rich.
For the rich.
Absolutely. Rich white people have always benefited quite well.
But in recent years they've seen their power slip some. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where
and I don't even think it's them. I don't think it's the rich, the vast richness, the rich whites. It's just whites in general. Because during slavery and segregation, there was always still this superiority, whether it was imaginary or not. Because it's imaginary to a degree. Yeah. It's not because of what was done in its place, as a result of it.
Yeah.
Lynchings and stuff like that. But it was an imaginary power. Or superiority. Now that that's going away, it's not the rich people. The rich people don't fucking care. They don't care.
No, they don't.
They never have to deal with it.
Because it doesn't affect them.
It doesn't affect them at all. They just use it to keep us at each other's throats by, stoking those fires that have never gone away. Yeah. I can't even say stoking the embers. The fires are still burning.
Burning, absolutely.
And I don't know what the answer to that is, but as part of our discussion today, I can only fall on the side that the South fucking won the war. Because even though they surrendered,
war, but like I said earlier, hearts and minds for sure.
In the end, they got more than what they had before. Yeah. And not even that. The
only thing they lost out on was their own country.
Still, politically, we still bow down to the South. You can't get a good candidate unless you know they can win at least parts of the South. The South still holds far more power than they should for where they're at. Because they have not moved forward that much.
No. And that's why I said at the beginning of the show that I've talked before about whether or not it would have been better off in the long run to say, okay, well, you want to be your own country, have your own country.
Yeah, it's difficult to say because I mean, like I said in the earlier at the show, beginning of the show, we only have hindsight, which gives us a good view. Would another 100 years of slavery, well, we'll say 50 to 75 years of slavery, been more preferable to the lynchings and the beatings and the jail, the incarceration rates? Would that really have been better than? Would the slavery have been better for African Americans in the South?
I mean, I think you could almost make the argument that it might have been worse.
Right. And that's kind of how I'm thinking because at the very least,
without protection from the Union, they probably, once a slave revolt happened, they probably would have just killed all the slaves.
Right. That's what I mean. In my view,
slaves drastically outnumbered slave owners in the South.
Right. I personally can't comment on which side would be better. I just feel that freedom from slavery, even if it's not true freedom, and in that sense, not being a slave is preferable to being a slave.
Yeah.
But again,
of course.
I can only say that from an idealistic kind of way.
Yeah.
I can't say that as a from any personal experience, whether mine or through my family.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I would much rather have to fight every day for my freedom, to maintain my freedom, than ever be considered a slave. That's me personally.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. And I think, like, moving forward, though, the only way you ever will change anything is for the country to kind of wake up and see.
Do you think reparation is the key? Because they're having those hearings again.
No, because I think it works. It's a temporary fix that could probably only make the situation worse.
Well, right. I can see that because the white people will be like, why are they getting it? They weren't slaves.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm curious. I'm wondering if they're going to televise any of these hearings because they're actually they're doing them now. They came back. I'd be curious to see the arguments on both sides. I'm indifferent to it. I think if that's where we come down on it, then that's the way it is. If we don't, we definitely still need to make fucking changes to our justice system, to how our police handle everything. I think, well, really, that's the main thing. Because there is still, you could still argue that there's still a level of slavery, because the vast majority of our incarcerated
economic slavery,
and you could argue that the level of incarceration is a form of slavery because it's hugely. What's the word I'm looking for? Unbalanced in the sense of how many African Americans are incarcerated.
Disproportionately, impacts.
And you can see, any person who's not intellectually deficient can look at their modern justice system and see Brock Peters getting 6 months suspended sentence for raping somebody because he's got a bright future ahead of him. When there's so many young black men in prison because they had a fucking half an ounce of weed on them. Well, and they're doing 10 to life.
Yeah. African Americans make up what? 13. Hey, there's a microphone there,
Yeah, I see that.
They make up what? 13% of the population, somewhere like that?
Yeah, it's less than 20. I know.
But they make up like 85 to 90% of the prison population.
And that has gone down slightly, but it hasn't gone down in a better way because what's taking the place of that small decrease is the Hispanics.
Yeah,
it's Hispanic incarceration.
But you look at just like overall numbers, like sheer volume. White people commit far more crimes than black people.
Well, it's just because we're higher numbers. The difference is we control the court system.
Yes, exactly. We control the power
because that's like the main difference in terms of justice between, say, black men and white men. We're just looking at men right now. But then you jump, because then there's the discrepancy or this level of discrimination between rich white men and rich and poor white men.
Yeah.
So there's levels to it all.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just we can't make the change for everybody until we start there with African Americans, because that is the beginning of the biggest the big part of the problem. That's the main thrust of it. You take care of that, and you can start fixing the justice system for everybody. But it has to start there.
There, yeah. No, I agree. I just think, if you take out the Industrial Revolution out of the picture,
mm-hmm.
I can almost you can almost look at where we are today, and you could say there really hasn't been any change.
No.
Outside of, we no longer have legal slavery. There really has been no change in the way our society functions, or at least our attitudes towards minorities, since probably prior to the Civil War.
Well, you're right. Attitude-wise, it's a lot easier for an African American man or woman to make their way in the world now, make their way in this country, to have.
But it hasn't. But it hasn't grown.
It doesn't mean that it's easy.
Well,
it's still far more difficult for them than it is for a white person.
And that's what I was going to say. Is it hasn't grown at the same rate that it has for everyone else in our society.
Right. Because you look at it. Things are better. It's not. I don't want to color it as though it's still the same, but we still have a very long way to go.
Well, yeah, and really most of the progress has been made in the last
30 years.
Well, I'd say the last 50 years.
Okay, 50 years. That's a fair assessment.
Since the 60s.
Right.
Late 50s,
as a
early
60s. Of the civil rights movement of the 60s.
Yes.
We've moved a lot faster. But look at what they had to overcome.
Oh yeah, of course.
Considering what they had to overcome, we've accomplished very little in the last 50 years.
No, and I would, and you can almost look at it and say we've advanced very little, probably since the 60s.
Yeah, the vast majority of the changes came in the 60s, and they haven't. The big stuff hasn't really.
No,
we haven't had much of a bigger change since.
Making positive inroads in minority neighborhoods with police.
That would be a huge.
Will make a
change.
big impact.
Yeah, and I don't know what the answer to that is either, because you can't have a racist test. How do you test a cop?
There's got to be a better.
You can do little changes like training and things like that.
You have to get more recruitment out of the neighborhood.
Absolutely, I've been saying that for years. If you have a neighborhood that's policed by people who live in the neighborhood, who know each other in the neighborhood, you're going to have a much fairer relationship, because that's what it ultimately boils down to. Most of the people in these neighborhoods don't trust the police for good reason.
Yeah, exactly.
And that makes them less likely to see because there is an authority issue with police. I was always taught that you show respect to the police. As an adult, I don't see that. I treat them like I treat everybody else. Yeah. But
you get respect after you earn it.
Right, exactly. But there is I guess it's kind of an unspoken law. Whether you respect them or not, if you're driving down the road and a cop turns their lights on, you know to pull over.
Yeah.
But if you have such a distrust and such a fear that's been ingrained in you because of what you see around you, those lights don't mean you're getting pulled over. Those lights could mean you're about to die.
Yeah.
And you're more likely to run.
Yeah.
But if you know that the officer who's probably pulling you over is maybe your neighbor or your best friend's uncle, you're going to stop. You're going to respect what society says you should do in those situations, and
there's less fear. There's less fear. There's less
exactly.
anxiety. Yes, which is a lot. I think a lot of the police harassment, the not necessarily harassment, because harassment is probably more on a racial level, but the deaths, the unarmed victims being, the unarmed people being shot by police. I think a lot of times that has more to do with fear of the person that they're pulling over, the fear of the person they're interacting with, than race.
But see, the person's getting pulled over is reacting on fear too.
Exactly.
Because they're going to run now,
yes,
or they're going to fight because they think, I don't have a chance here. I either need to run, it's the fight or flight.
Yeah.
If those are your only two options, where it's not for white people, we can just keep our mouths shut, we get a little ticket or a warning, and we're good.
Yeah.
But they don't have in their minds and in reality, to some degree, they don't have those options.
Yeah.
So that's the problem. So the cops are afraid of the fight, and the African American who's getting pulled over is afraid of dying. So there's two parties just going in afraid of each other.
It's a bad situation all around.
And whoever has the gun is going to win.
Yeah,
exactly. Unfortunately. But that's racism too. I mean, you don't want to devalue that. You don't want to say it's not a conscious choice to some degree.
Yeah.
As a police officer.
But going back to what I was saying though, I think it's fear of. That's my dog, by the way.
Yeah.
It's fear from the police officer, but I think that having more community-based policing
absolutely
would negate a vast majority of that
absolutely.
fear.
And also, I think having better representation overall too.
She's a Pete's dog.
Yeah. She's something else. It's all about representation, and I don't think the African American communities have enough representation either.
No.
So, but that would be a big part of it. If you're feeling like you're not being represented in your local government, in your state government, in your federal government, and there's no reason that any African American in this country should feel represented by their federal government.
Yeah.
Because we look at who's in control of the federal government
right
now. And in a lot of cases, the South, especially in the South, those same people who are running the federal government, they're the same mentality as running the state governments.
Yeah. But when you have no faith in your police, when you have no faith in your city government, when you have no faith in your state government, when you have no faith in your federal government, where do you turn? You don't.
There's
nowhere to turn.
That's why you have a higher level of crime, poverty. I mean, everything. It's all cyclical. It all feeds itself. The negativity all feeds itself, and it's not. To me, it seems like a very easy answer. As far as our nation goes, we have no problem trying to create opportunities for this group or that group. I don't understand why we can't, as a society, say inner cities. I mean, that's where it all boils down to. That's where a lot of African Americans are forced into, is into city, urban settings, because it's easy to
move around. It's easier to get where you need to go. Everything's kind of more centrally located.
Right. Well, that's the byproduct, but it's intentional. It's intentional to force these communities
to where they are.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the bigger that kind of goes back to the bigger question is ultimately what can be done. You're talking about trying to undo 200 plus years.
I would say close to 500 years
mentality. Okay, well, I'm talking about just like modern.
Right.
But it's that mentality that has racism and slavery is ingrained in American culture.
Yeah. It's unfortunate. And I don't know what the answer to that is.
I don't know if there is an answer.
No, I don't either. I mean, it's just the baby steps that we keep taking. Eventually,
but have we taken them? That's
some.
Very few.
We've taken baby steps in the sense that when I said representation, there are a lot of African American representatives in our government, federal, state, and local.
Nowhere close to what there should be.
No, but again, that's a baby step
on a proportional level.
Yeah, that's a baby step. Having a black president, that's a baby step. The whites are all like, white people, especially racist. Oh, racism's over. You had a black president. No, that's a fucking baby step. Because we had to have a genius black president. And then on either side of him, 2 fucking idiots.
Yeah.
Who are white. Like Chris Rock says, you get a black president who's like fucking Kanye West. You get President Kanye West, racism's over. Because that's when it doesn't matter what color he is.
I guess.
No, it makes sense. Obama had to be the best of the best to even get to that point.
No, I
Whereas
understand what you're saying.
You can get fucking idiot Trump or idiot George Bush, and they just become president for no reason.
Haven't you ever seen Idiocracy?
Yeah.
Same thing.
But even there's no racism in Idiocracy.
No, because look at the president.
Exactly. I don't want Idiocracy though. No. Nobody should want Idiocracy.
Sometimes I feel like that's where we're headed though.
Sometimes I feel like that's where we're at.
Yeah.
But anyway, but it's baby steps. It's little, and it shouldn't have to be. We're not fucking children.
I think the first step is just awakening. Just kind of understanding what has happened. Mm-hmm. Because the vast majority of our country doesn't. They don't understand.
Yeah, we don't teach history anymore.
No, but they don't understand the hidden or underlying meaning behind steps that our government officials have taken time and time again.
I know.
Over the course of the last
150 years. And that's both sides, but you can obviously, if you look back and you look at how things have progressed, you can see which side is making the better progress and the less progress.
Yeah.
You can see that.
You can see where priorities lie.
Right. But both sides are guilty of the bad stuff too.
Oh, of course.
There's no question.
There's no question
because,
about that.
I don't know. It's just right now we're at baby steps. And if we keep going the way we're going, it will eventually get better. But we need to start making better strides so it gets there faster. That's all.
I would like to say that all this, I probably should have prefaced this. This has all come from 2 white guys. So
right. Well, that's what I tried to point out.
So we speak to everything, or the way we look at everything is all through the white prism. So I don't understand, or I'm not even trying to understand what black culture goes through,
right,
or relate to that culture.
All we can do is say that
cultural appropriation going on.
No. All we can say is that we understand that there's a problem,
and there has been,
and has been for forever. And it's not getting better fast enough.
Yeah,
that's we can be intellectually honest and say that.
Yeah,
and discuss this from that perspective. But like I said, I can't make the statement whether or not slavery for another 100 years by letting the South go would have been better than what we got.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I could make the argument that probably it's not.
Right. And that's as I said, for me personally, I would rather be free and have to fight every day
than being in chains.
Than to be in chains from the get-go. Yeah. Exactly.
Oh, man, I don't have anything else to add.
I don't either. It's just, like I said, this is a bit of a downer episode, but it's important.
It's
important that people are talking about this.
Yeah. Even if it is 2 white guys in southeastern Michigan.
Somebody's got to talk about it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's just... if you have...
At the very least, we need to talk to other white guys and make sure that they're on the same page.
Yeah.
You know?
I would say this, is if you have any kind of issues or comments on what we've talked about, go to our Facebook page.
Yeah.
I'm going to... I'm going to post this on Facebook. There'll be a post on there. You can go on... I always share it on my Facebook page. It would be nice if Ian would share shit on his every once in a while, but
I do
sometimes,
not every time. But I whenever I see it and I'm like not just glancing, I always save it if I see it, but
so it'll be shared on. It's shared on Facebook. It's shared on Twitter. It's shared on my Instagram account. There's always I give the email address every single episode. Mm-hmm. You can email us. There's always ways to interact, and I always welcome the argument or the conversation. I shouldn't say argument. I always welcome the conversation.
I don't mind,
especially when it comes to race and things like that.
As long as it's intellectually honest. I want intellectually honest arguments, but I always welcome arguments.
Well, because argument's kind of a heated term. That's why I say conversation.
Yeah,
I always welcome conversation. So
just be intellectually honest.
Exactly. So yeah, any questions or comments, you can email us, contact@lifeandjournalpodcast.com. On Twitter, we're at LIGpod. You can search the show on Facebook. And I don't know, that's all I got, Ian.
Yeah, that's all I got too. Wake up, people.
All right. Well,
whole world.
Until next time.
Talk to y'all later.
Peace.
Playing my role, let me tell you about it. This shit right here, man, about it. Only real niggas reside around me. Yo, old lady, drop a guard around me. Dip like I know you can, bitch. Show me the ropes like we in the ring. Got you two cobras, you wanna hang. Shoulder to shoulder, them niggas basic. You know I won't lie. You know that I ain't for that fuck shit. You niggas alright, but I'm way better and she love it. Know that y'all sick as fuck. Here go this tissue, bro. We taking the dub, hoping you get you some. This hit like a pick me up. She taking my drugs. Know they see the sign. That's some dollar signs. Know they sick as fuck. Know they sick as fuck. Tell them get well soon. Tell them get well soon. Know you sick as fuck. Get well soon. Oh shit. Watch out, you the god, Billy. Oh shit. Right now, and I'm smiling in your face, bitch. With a gold smile, you should probably make placement to your eye. Niggas sick as fuck. Standing with niggas who down for that party. Who down for some bitches who showing their bodies. Swear to God, nigga, this Molly got me up and rolling. These bodies of water. Bring that shit in bottles. We must at the party.